Welcome, everyone. We're here to hear about how some of the research going on in our current Grand Challenges program. We'll be starting with Dr. Devin Quinn, representing the Successful Aging Grand Challenge team. Dr. Quinn is chair of the Adult Clinical Service in Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, professor of psychiatry. And some of the work that he'll be talking about here is a pilot program that was funded through the Successful Aging Grand Challenge related to his work as director of the UNM Transcranial Magnetic Stimulation Service. And I'm going to go ahead and start sharing your presentation and turn it over to Dr. Quinn.
Thank you. And it looks like I'm seeing the presenter mode, not the full screen.
Oh, geez. I'm sorry. Let me figure that back out. Did I do better, or are we still in the wrong mode?
It looks like it's still in presenter mode. I can share my slides from my end if that's
okay. Why don't we do that while I figure out? I apologize.
No, not at all. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, super. Thanks so much for the introduction, Anita. I'm Devin Quinn. I'm a professor of psychiatry and the vice chair, not the chair. I'm sure if my chair were listening, he'd want to correct that. So, but it's my pleasure to speak to you today about our research that was funded by the UNM Successful Aging Grand Challenge, pilot study called Individualized Targeting and Neuromodulation of Late Life Depression. I'm happy to speak on behalf of my colleagues who worked on this with me, Andre Vakhtine, Sefer Ryman, and Chris Abbott. So in this quad chart here, just direct your attention to the lower right. Why is late life depression a big deal? 10 to 15% of people will suffer from late life depression. So obviously leads to poor quality of life. People struggle with loneliness, with isolation, with increasing health concerns and financial concerns in later life. So late life depression is something that we in our geriatric psychiatry division are very focused on treating. Current treatments, unfortunately, have relatively low efficacy compared to antidepressant treatments for other age groups. And in particular, folks in later life experience higher rates of side effects and lower efficacy. Therefore, we're motivated to try to improve the treatments that exist and see if we can optimize them specifically for this condition. What we did in this single-arm unblinded clinical trial was to use repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is an FDA-approved treatment for depression, and we sought to optimize it. We optimized it doing a couple of different things. First of all, we used functional magnetic resonance imaging to determine targets in each individual's brain. So each individual had a specific target specific to them. Number two, we delivered it in an accelerated fashion. So instead of the usual FDA-approved 1 treatment a day, we delivered 5 treatments a day. Instead of taking 8 weeks, your course of treatment only takes 2 weeks. And number three, we wanted to use neuroimaging to try to understand the changes in the brain associated with improvement in depression. So we recruited 24 subjects, ages 50 to 79. They all had treatment-resistant depression, had tried antidepressant medications, had tried psychotherapy, and had not responded to those interventions. We excluded people with psychosis, dementia, and who could not obtain an MRI. And our goals were to first of all, demonstrate that This is a method that can be used in this population. Currently, targeting and acceleration of TMS is being done more broadly in middle age and early age depression, but it had never really been studied in late life depression before. Next slide. Oh, that'll be me, sorry. So these are our results. We, first of all, developed a pipeline for determining these individual targets. What you see is in the 3 colors in panel A is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, a very important node in the brain involved in mood regulation as well as cognitive control. We then analyzed how the activity of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex correlates with activity in another important node called the subgenual cingulate cortex, also in panel A. And we looked for the highest or most anti-correlated part of the DLPFC as our target. And that's what you see in panel B is the array of targets. And the one in yellow was the one with the greatest anti-correlation. We see that these 2 areas are anti-correlated. And that's what helps us to determine what is the node of entry with the highest likelihood of improving depression. This is a method been studied for the last 10 years, and we're using it here in our study. We then import these targets and the 3D brain into our targeting system that you see in the lower left. There's a patient who's receiving the neuronavigated brain stimulation right to that target within the DLPFC. In the lower right, what you see is the array of the various subjects and where their targets fell within the DLPFC, and they were quite scattered. So certainly argues in favor of using an individualized approach because rather than the generic target, which is the red dot on the brain, that's where we put it for everyone in conventional TMS. As you can see, most people actually had targets that were quite distant from that generic target. These were our results in terms of depression and anxiety. What you see on the left is the depression score. A higher score indicates greater depression. Patients started off with an average score of 40 on the inventory of depressive symptoms, which is moderate to severe. Over the course of the 2 weeks, visit 2 was at 1 week and visit 3 was at 2 weeks. You see that there was an approximate 50% reduction in depression symptoms. So over 9 days, their depression improved 50%. And these were people, I'll remind you, with very treatment-resistant depression. One woman, in fact, told us that she had never felt as good as she felt in 40 years of living with depression. You see on the right that they also had improvements in anxiety. So the GAD-7 scale of generalized anxiety reduced from about an average of 10 to an average of 6 by the end of treatment. We looked at the connectivity between the DLPFC and the subgenual cingulate to see if it changed over time with treatment, and it did. We had a significant reduction in the anti-correlation of those areas. So we think that this was a demonstration of target engagement, that our intervention was doing something. And this was moderately correlated, albeit not quite to the level of significance that we would like, but the change in connectivity between these 2 areas was correlated with the change in the depression symptoms. So we think that this is, we're headed in the right direction based on this finding. We're seeking more subjects so that we can improve on the statistical power that we have. The next steps for us, we also would like to understand why does late life depression seem more treatment resistant than depression in other parts of life? One of the possibilities that we're considering and that we're looking into in the next phase of our research is that the white matter, the health of the white matter connections in the brain may have something to do with efficacy or lack of efficacy. So we are now using white matter tract quantification methods, as well as white matter damage quantification methods to look for correlates of depression response, such as the strength of the white matter termini in the DLPFC, or the level of damage that we see in the white matter tracts in general. So this is the work of our Computational Neurosciences and Precision Therapeutics Lab, otherwise known as CONCEPT. We do optimization of various different types of brain stimulation, transcranial electrical, electroconvulsive therapy, even VNS, and in some cases DBS. We engage in various types of optimization strategies like what I just showed you, and we use different imaging modalities to assess target engagement. And these are the many people who participate in concept. And just point out the multidisciplinary team nature of the work. We have collaborators from psychiatry, from neuropsychology and neuroimaging, from physics and mathematics backgrounds, from neurosciences and clinical trials research, as well as many volunteers, students and learners and trainees who dedicated their time. So I'm happy to take any questions at this time about this study.
Please feel free to put a question into the chat, or I think we're a small enough group that if you want to raise your hands and pop in, I'll give you a second to do that. One of the things that I really like about the Grand Challenges programs has been this ability to fund pilot programs. And Dr. Quinn's is definitely one example of something that has that started small and has a lot of potential as it grows, not only from the science perspective, but also from the interest that he's generating and the larger amounts of external funding that might come from it. I don't see any questions right now, so I'm gonna keep this moving. Thank you very much for your time and very interesting study.
My pleasure.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and move to from successful aging to substance use disorders Grand Challenge with Dr. Heath, who's assistant professor in chemistry and chemical biology, as well as joint into the Department of Internal Medicine. Through the Grand Challenges, a lot of my interaction with Dr. Heath has been through his work with educating our New Mexico high school teachers about doing research. So it's a pleasure to have you, Dr. Heath, and I will turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending the team symposium. My name is Heath, and I would like to thank Anita and Katie for inviting me to give a lightning talk here. My research group is part of the Substance Use Disorder Grand Challenge team. The title of my talk is Find a New Solution to Address Substance Use Disorders. So our research is built on top of the prior experimental work done by Professor Kenny Cell Madison at the University of Copenhagen. In 2018, Kenny demonstrated that the role of PIC1 in cocaine addiction using a mice experiment. It can be seen that for mice without PIC1 protein, these mice have significantly fewer demands for cocaine reinforcement. With this observation, Kenny proposed that PIC1 could be a drug target to address opioid-related substance use disorders. Even with this success, as of today, we still have very limited understanding of the PIC1 protein. So since we mentioned about PIC1 in the previous slide, what is PIC1? So PIC1 is a large, flexible multi-domain protein that play its biological functions in a dimer form, as you can see here. It consists of three components: a PDZ domain, a flexible linker, and a bar domain. So the PDZ domain is considered a druggable site, as illustrated here. This is a binding pocket. So the structure shown here is a computer modeled structure, not an experimentally determined one. So our long-term goals are listed below. So as a faculty in computational chemistry and biochemistry, we do basic science, and we want to know how PIC1 plays biological functions at atomic resolution. How is PIC1 activated and deactivated by different types of ligands? How does a drug binding at the PDZ domain affect other parts of PIC1? How does PIC1 interact with its binding partners? This is extremely difficult to reveal using experiments. So more importantly, we want to develop an effective drug that can inhibit the biological function of PIK1 with high specificity to address opioid-based related substance use disorders. Most of the drugs targeting the PIK1 PTZ domain in the past have failed because they cannot achieve the desired binding affinity. So lastly, large, flexible multi-domain proteins are difficult to study using either experiments or computations because of their size and flexibilities. We are building a computational pipeline that can be combined with experiments so that we can explore this group of proteins. So my group joined the Substance Use Disorder Grand Challenge team in 2019. As you can see, we started with a project in basic science. So thanks to the support of the Grand Challenge team, within a 2-year period of time during the pandemic, on the research front, we were able to transfer the Grand Challenge pilot project to our first NSF awards in 2021 and finished 7 manuscripts. 3 of them are published or accepted already. 4 of them are basically ready to submit. On the educational front, the graduate students leading the PIK1 project received the 2021 NSF GRFP Awards. It is one of the most prestigious awards for graduate students. As Anita pointed out, we also partner with neighboring schools and institutions using the PIK1 project as a platform combined with virtual reality and remote learning to introduce computational skills and raise awareness of opioid-related substance use disorders in our local community. So as a junior faculty member, I'm proud to be part of the Grand Challenge team. Though my research is more close to basic science and drug development, I hope to have more interactions and learn more about how substance use disorders are addressed in the clinical field. In the end, I would like to thank the strong support from my Grand Challenge team, and we hope the Grand Challenge team will continue to support us to compete for other funding, such as NSF Career and NIHR1. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. If anyone has questions, we have time for a quick question. Question in the chat. Can you say more about the binding affinity challenge?
Katie, thank you for the question. So in the past, most of the drugs developed to target the PIK1 PTZ domain, they're able to reach micromolar affinity, which in terms of medicine, you're gonna need a super high concentration in order for the drug to take effect. Recently, some recent advancement made in Kenny's group is utilizing peptides. So with peptides, they are able to reach kind of nanomolar affinity. This is kind of a big achievement. However, the drug is still under evaluation, whether it's going to be ready for clinical trial or not. So our role here is to engineer the peptides by provide multiple binding sites on the peptides so that we can enhance the binding between the peptides and the PTZ domain, and potentially could use one peptide target multiple PTZ domains. By doing that, we're hoping to reach a binding affinity at nanomolar, but have a small peptides.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Heath. Really appreciate hearing about the work and about your success working through the Grand Challenge program.
Yeah, Anita.
Very, very exciting to hear. Thank you. Our next speaker, we've got a little something different. Dr. Anjali Mulchandani is an assistant professor in the Department of Civil Construction and Environmental Engineering and she's going to talk to us today about the Sustainable Water Resources Grand Challenge and their work with a communication scholarship for undergraduate students. A lot of the student work was presented at the Undergraduate Research Symposium, and I and a number of the other people who attended that session were just completely blown away about what the undergraduate students presented. So I'm really happy to have you here with us today and able to share the work.
Thanks, Anita. Yes, as Anita said, my name is Anjali Mulchandani. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Civil Engineering here at UNM and on the leadership team for the Grand Challenge for Sustainable Water Resources. Today, I'll be talking about our undergraduate research communication scholarship. And before I go forward, I do want to acknowledge my two co-authors who helped lead this opportunity, Sydney Donohue from the Center for Water and the Environment, who's also a grad student in the Water Resources program, as well as Alex Webster, a new assistant professor in the Department of Biology. So to begin, the Sustainable Water Resources Grand Challenge is an interdisciplinary collaboration between several departments on campus, including law, policy, natural sciences, social sciences, and engineering. And our goal is to tackle water resources and sustainability in New Mexico and work together to help decision makers, communities, and individuals make choices about how they manage water, making sure that we balance New Mexico's economy, environment, and our unique social fabric. And as we were thinking about what we wanted to do as a grand challenge, we also started to look at the mission of UNM, the University of New Mexico. And we found that public communication is integral to UNM's mission of creating and applying, and more than anything, disseminating new knowledge and making sure that we are sharing the advances that we have in our understanding of the world, its people, and our cultures. So we want to align the goals of the Grand Challenge and UNM to create a science communication scholarship for undergraduates interested in water. And we saw that these communication projects can ultimately be used as a tool for us to disseminate our research and the new knowledge that we've created to our broader community. So the vision for this scholarship, and you can see the advertisement on the left-hand side that we distributed out to students, was really to bring in students who have yet to performed any research and pair them with an advisor. We did have an opportunity for students who already had existing research projects to also build in a communication portion into that as well. The students then can interview the advisor and come up with a project that communicates their advisor's research to the broader public. So the student doesn't necessarily need to come up with a research topic right out the gate. They can start to learn about this and learn about communications at the same time. The students meet as a cohort on a weekly basis to kind of touch base with one another, talk about how they're doing in terms of their progress. And more than anything, this fosters a sense of community and belonging, particularly coming out of the pandemic where students spent 2 years online, not really knowing one another. Our vision was to bring them together with a shared sense of purpose. As Anita mentioned, the students just had their final presentations at UROC, the Undergraduate Research Opportunity Conference, on April 7th. And now we're working together to publish their completed projects on the UNM-sponsored Environment-Focused Learning Academy website. So making it happen, how did we take this vision of a grand challenge scholarship and turn it into reality? We distributed a call to faculty mentors in about October. And then once we had a list of faculty members who were interested, we then put out an application for students. This was distributed all across campus. We put flyers up in dormitories, in buildings, and then Grand Challenge leadership team members went to classrooms to also make presentations about joining this opportunity. Students indicated which faculty member they felt most connected to, and we attempted to pair these students accordingly. The students were notified of their acceptance in early January with a cohort meeting in late January. And one of the key things that we wanted to institute was a payment to the students for the fact that they were doing work. And so we decided to split up a $1,000 payment into two halves, one that was given at the beginning of the semester to incentivize the work, and then one at the end for completing. So once we got this started, we were off to the races. And over the course of the semester, the students collaborated with their faculty mentor to come up with their communication project, and they met weekly with their cohort. And now I just kind of want to show you some of the results of what the products were that they put together. And most of these photos come from UROC, the Undergraduate Research Opportunity Conference. I'll start with Will Crockett. Will is a student in the biology department, mentored by Marcy Litvack and Masimi Roy. You can see in this upper left-hand corner that he was originally talking about how scientists collect these large data sets, but that's not exactly communicable with the public. Instead, the public understands pictures. So here, Will has charcoal drawings of forests after fires and how these forests tend to start to regenerate and rejuvenate over time. These beautiful charcoal drawings really took our breath away because Will was very low-key about this skill that he developed over COVID. Next, I have Coty Cramer. She is a civil engineering student mentored by Alex Webster, Yolanda Lin, and myself. Coty attended a 5-day workshop on modeling the Santa Fe watershed that Mark Stone will be speaking about in a few minutes. And she translated all of the discussion that occurred over this 5-day workshop into an infographic. And here you can see how she broke apart each day and the vision of what happened and how all these pieces that were discussed in different subgroups of this workshop and how they all came together to discuss a larger water problem. Third, I have Cameron Zacek. She's a student in the economics department with a minor in environmental science. Cameron made this amazing painting of the Southwest willow eyecatcher. This is a bird that lives in the bosque. And she accompanied this painting with a beautiful verbal presentation about balancing the needs of an individual endangered species versus all of the species that live harmoniously together in the bosque, and how our attention often tends to fall on one species at the risk of ignoring everything else that works together in an ecosystem. Cameron was mentored by Adrian Oglesby in the law school. Next, we have Nahajoni Rain, an economics student mentored by Jingjing Wang. She put together this beautiful poster talking about her life as a Navajo farmer and how farming communities have a relationship with water, and how her coming to UNM, these brick buildings where we don't have this relationship with the land, really changed her view and challenged her view. But ultimately it came full circle, and how her relationship with water still continues here today. She's now working on a video that we're going to put together and post on the AFLA website. Just to quickly walk you through the final few, we have Yvonne Morales from the geography department, mentored by Ben Warner, who developed an ArcGIS story map of the Red River mining contamination. She actually grew up nearby, and so she wanted to communicate what the extent of this contamination was and how communities were impacted by this. So Agnamila Gallet from the EPS department with a minor in sustainability, mentored by Bill Fleming, was interested in photographing acequias. And what I found marvelous about this one was she photographed acequias now and then used her imagination and knowledge of climate change to Photoshop images of acequias now and talk about what they would look like in 10 to 50 years under the impact of climate change. And she discussed all of this accordingly. Cassandra Hano, also from the geography department, mentored by Yolanda Lin, was working with the Okeowinge Pueblo on modeling post-wildfire flooding and put together this infographic discussing all of the research endeavors that are ongoing on their NSF-funded project. And finally, we have two students who are working on podcasts. Jamie Ritchie from civil engineering, mentored by Heather Himmelberger, and Renee Simonson from biology, mentored by Becky Bixby. And both of these students were interviewing water resources and water engineering faculty members across UNM, as well as people out in the community to understand their relationship with water and piecing them together into these audio podcasts. Jamie's podcast was just recently published, and you can follow it at this link here on the EFLA website, and her podcast is called Nourishing Our Riverlands. So some key takeaways from this communication scholarship. Our goal was to connect the missions of the Grand Challenges and UNM by sponsoring undergrads to build science communication projects. We had a lot of great successes. The key one was this cohort and community aspect, bringing together students from multiple departments on a common mission. Most of the semester was largely student-driven, beyond the initial administrative effort of putting the scholarship together and the final effort of organizing the Undergraduate Research Opportunity Conference. The students led their weekly meetings on their own with minimal supervision. I also think one of the successes was that it was a paid opportunity, so students were committed throughout the semester. You can do this in your own department or center, and I think that there's a lot of wins that are in it for you as well. Number one, it increases your visibility. These projects then help you communicate your work to the broader public. Number two, it engages the students. It helps them feel like they are part of something. UNM is an R1 research institution, and to bring in new students into that fold and engage a creative aspect of research really, really is rewarding. And finally, it helps us find common themes across our research. By being able to see what other people in our Grand Challenge or across the university are working on, we can now see how we can collaborate together and maybe how we can develop new communication projects to tie all of this into one common thread and solve our world's or the state's grand challenges. With that, I want to thank you for listening, and I open the floor for any questions. If you want to get in touch with me, or if you want to talk to any of these students to commission them to make additional pieces for you, please email me. My email is anjaliem@unm.edu. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjali. Do we have time for about one quick question? Hope, do you want to unmute and ask? I don't know if she's coming through. I'm going to go ahead and move on, and hopefully at the end we'll have a little bit more time. I really just can't say enough about this project and the way the students were engaged and how they behaved as a cohort, supporting each other at the event. It was really cool to see, and it's something that I hope that we can copy in other areas and other grand challenges. So thank you very much for your work. And next, I'm going to move on to James Cavanagh, who's representing the Substance Use Disorders Grand Challenge. Dr. Cavanagh's associate professor in the Department of Psychology, specializing in using cognitive neuroscience methods to understand how the brain contributes to high-level executive abilities like decision-making and learning, and how emotion colors these processes. And he is here to share with us his work for the Substance Use Disorders Grand Challenge. We'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. You can all see my screen all nicely, hopefully. Yeah, I see some nodding heads. All right. So I'm going to talk to you about a phenomenon known as QReactivity, and in heavy drinkers specifically. So what is QReactivity? So it's a Q, like a picture of a delicious frosty beer or a nice scotch on the rocks. And QReactivity is enhanced attention to these relevant images in people who get hedonic pleasure and enjoyment from them. This is a very robust and reliable finding in substance abuse. It's actually thought to be perhaps a general mechanism by which the salience, the importance, the overwhelmingness, the intensity of these events and these occurrences can influence the life of the heavy drinker. And it's actually been used as a basis of interventions. For example, attention bias modification. Can we train people to not be very reactive to cues, to not have attention biases, to diminish their brain reactivity to frosty beers and glasses of wine? There's been examples. I read a paper this morning using TMS, the transcranial magnetic stimulation that Dr. Quinn had talked about, to try to diminish this exact phenomenon. Where I wanted to come into this work, never having done substance abuse work, is as a neuroscientist, I find this a bit of a bad target. This is a cognitive phenomenon. It's a behavioral response to attend to things. It's not a mechanistic process by which the brain computes and exerts control over behavior. So I thought, could we link a QReactive approach with mechanistic studies that my lab does? And one thing we study a lot of is reward processing. And so you can see there might be some commonalities here. We study in particular one brain event, an electrical brain event called the reward positivity. It's a positive going voltage deflection. You can see it here in the topographic plot. The little nose is on top and the ears are on the side. It's about right at the vertex of the skull. We can record this with one of the fun recording procedures we do in the lab. And it bursts from about 200 to 400 milliseconds after getting a reward. So it's fast, it's active. And it occurs to any sort of reward. You can take a learning task and be told, oh, that was correct. Or you can just get a thumbs up. You could win money. Any of these stimuli. You could get a tone. You could get a bell. You could get a flashing light. If you know it means that you win or you get a reward, you get this common brain response. One thing my lab has been interested in is that there's more to reward than just learning or knowing you did something right. Reward involves a lot of processes like liking things, getting hedonic pleasure. And my grad student, Darren Brown, who's now my former grad student, who's now a professor at Pitzer College, did a number of studies trying to investigate what do people like? Can we get a hedonic aspect that we can capture of reward? And believe it or not, just trust me on this one, over 12 studies, he found that pictures of puppies is the best way to get something that someone likes. So people rate puppies as being pleasant, more pleasant than even plus ones, more pleasant than chairs, more pleasant than other things like cows. Cows are fine. People are perfectly fine seeing an image of a cow, but they don't like seeing an image of a cow. So in this series of experiments, we just wanted to see, all other things held constant, if we show people a picture of a puppy when they get a reward, this green screen, do we get a larger brain response? And across 2 studies, Darren did find that depending on how much a person actually likes these images, how much you prefer seeing images of puppies, your brain response to reward was selectively enhanced. Now this was challenging. It's a bit of a goofy approach, but it's really hard to quantify hedonic pleasure or liking. But we think we've got this down. And we just figured out this approach, assessing these hard to quantify individual characteristics of hedonic pleasure and showing a brain response that can be increased by it. So I hope you can see, you can put 1 and 1 together. Instead of looking at pictures of puppies and other benign stimuli, could we look at pictures of alcohol images in people who enjoy drinking and see if that boosts brain reward signals? So my grad student Garima Singh took the lead on this one. And she collected data with help from Katie Witzkowitz and Eric Claus with the MRN in heavy drinkers and non-drinkers in this AUD group, the alcohol use disorder group. They rated a lot of image classes the same as a control group. And these are non-drinking controls, people who really just don't imbibe very much. We scored these based on a questionnaire called the Audit, which assesses drinking tendencies. What was really nice about this, a nice face valid justification, is that yes, people who drink a lot rate images of alcohol as being more liked. They straight up like them more. So that's nice. That's kind of what we expected. That's kind of the hedonic part of QReactivity. Now, unfortunately, we didn't see a difference in the reward positivity itself to puppies or alcohol between groups. And this was, again, unfortunate, but not unexpected. Our previous 2 studies done by Darren didn't show any group differences either. We found this was an individual characteristic. But we do see that nice burst of reward from 200 to 400 milliseconds, whether you see a picture of a cute puppy or whether you see a nice scotch on the rocks, for example, during a learning task. What we did find the two groups are shown here, is the more you rated liking on the x-axis here, the more you liked looking at pictures of puppies, and most people like puppies more than alcohol. It's just a fact of life. The larger your brain response was when given a picture of a puppy compared to alcohol. But the inverse is exactly true as well. These are the tendencies are the same between groups. The more you like pictures of alcohol, which again, only really varied within the AUD group, the larger your brain reward response to pictures of alcohol. All other things considered with a nice contrast. And this was all a priori predicted from two previous studies. So that was another excellent, not only a replication, but extension to understanding a clinically relevant phenomenon. Griemer went further and demonstrated that the more someone drinks, this audit score, this is the measure of drinking propensity, the larger your brain reward signals to alcohol were, even independent of a rating of liking. So we really are seeing an individual specific. The more you like cues, the more you tend to drink, the more your brain is sort of goosed, enhanced, primed, boosted by pictures of alcohol. Why does this matter? That's why I put a period at the top. Yes, this does work. This matters because this is a brain mechanism. Reward processes are a fundamental way by which the brain changes neuronal connections. And one of the consequences of neuronal connection changes to reward is habit formation. Habits like being in a situation and getting a certain craving to perform a behavioral tendency like consuming. So we think this work has helped us extend our basic work in hedonic aspects of reward to a clinically relevant phenomenon and get us closer to a mechanistic understanding of QReactivity in heavy drinkers. I'm happy to take any questions.
You can feel free to put a question in the chat or raise your hand. I'm most interested in where your work goes from here, particularly in terms of the interdisciplinary nature of the work and of the Grand Challenge.
Well, curiously, I have a number of projects with Dr. Quinn. Some of them are on major depressive disorder, where we're targeting that same brain region, and we're going to be applying these electrophysiological assessments as a pre-post neural marker of the entire approach that Dr. Quinn had discussed, because we've demonstrated very recently that in depressed individuals, the difference in this reward signal is the same subgenual nodule that Devin is trying to treat in the geriatric depressed group. So what I'd like to do, this substance abuse is a brand new direction for me, is consider the same approach. You know, people are using TMS to treat this. If this is a mechanistic approach, could we target it in the same way that we're treating other disorders? Think of anhedonia in depression as the lack of being able to like things. This is the exact 180-degree opposite. It's just liking things way, 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 way too much. That seems like we could apply the same approach. Maybe we upregulate versus downregulate, sure, but you know, we're really finding some commonalities here in hedonia, either anhedonic or a little bit over-exuberant hedonia.
Very interesting. I really appreciate you taking the time to share this with us. I'm going to move quickly to our last speaker, and then hopefully we'll have a couple minutes at the end if there are additional questions. Our last speaker today is Dr. Mark Stone, filling in for Yolanda Lin, who couldn't be here today. Mark, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and this work. This is also part of the Sustainable Water Resources Grand Challenge, and a really good example of the collaborative way in which the whole Water Resources Grand Challenge team functions and works together on these different initiatives. So Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks a lot, Anita. And yeah, I'm last minute pinch hitting here. So to me, it feels like the pressure is really low, because just the fact that I'm here, I think really says that I've done something. And I'm stepping in for Yolanda, who's unfortunately ill today, and Alex, who's out on family leave. So I'm the third one up, but happy to step in here. And my name is Mark Stone. I'm in the Department of Civil Construction and Environmental Engineering with Anjali, who's down the hall from me. And also we'll be talking about the Water Resources Grand Challenges. So we're connected there. And you've already seen a little bit of a preview of what I'm going to talk today based on some of the great artwork that came out of the task that Anjali covered. So I'll be talking about collaborative systems modeling with an emphasis on resilient and sustainable water resources. And this was a dual effort, see if I can advance my slides here, between the Sustainable Water Resources Grand Challenges and another effort here on campus known as the Intermountain West Transformation Network. To give you a little bit of background on these 2 points, I think this team is pretty familiar with the Water Resources Grand Challenge or the Grand Challenges in general, but here's what our goals are: is to facilitate collaboration really across campus. And I've been proud to be a member of that since its inception. And I think it's been a really successful effort. We really have, I would say, upped our game in terms of collaboration across campus in this area. I felt at the beginning that maybe there was no one left on campus working in water resources who I didn't already know, having been at UNM for over a dozen years now, but I've met so many new people and started new collaborations, new ideas. So I've been proven wrong. And on the other front here, the Intermountain West Transformation Network is a group that I actually oversee. This is a recently funded NSF grant through the Sustainable Regional Systems Program. It's a $15 million 5-year effort that includes 8 partner universities across the Intermountain West, from Washington State in the Northwest to us all the way down here in the Southwest. And there's an important connection here because it was through the Sustainable Water Resources Grand Challenge that we got a shot in the arm back in the proposal development period that I think helped put us over the top to get this funded. So our 2 groups teamed up to support this workshop that I'm going to be summarizing. So, this was the big picture question that really Alex and Yolanda came together to try and answer, and that I contributed to a little bit. We agree that sustainable water resources is an enormous challenge for our region, and that's probably the most obvious thing you could state. But what do we do to try and really collaborate, catalyze a collaborative relationship across interdisciplinary teams? And I really like that Yolanda put here with a group of very busy people, because this really is perhaps the biggest challenge of the Grand Challenges, is that we've got a lot of energy and a lot of great ideas. I'm sure this is true for the other Grand Challenges as well, that we've got limited bandwidth. So what can you do to bring people together, keep them engaged, and try to move the discussion forward? So, the background on who we are, we had a couple of dozen people who came together. I like Yolanda's wording here that there are a bunch of water somethings. I had a bunch of people working really interdisciplinary. We had at least nine departments that were represented. And I think another important aspect of the diversity of this team was that it was really across a range of career stages. We had everywhere from undergraduate students up through emeritus and retired people. So we really had a range of experiences, and it was nice to have the opportunity to spend some time thinking about how to take on these big challenges. So what we were doing was applying systems thinking, and as I'm going to highlight here in just a second, we were applying it to a case study up in the Santa Fe watershed. It's hard to break down. I think Yolanda took a shot here, but hard to break down what systems thinking really means and what it represents on one slide in 1 minute. But in a nutshell, it's really trying to take our conceptual understandings of how systems work. And a system can be anything from a car to an economy, right? It can be anything. It depends on what we're trying to understand. In this case, we were trying to understand the socio-ecological system that dictates how watersheds function, both the physical components, the social components, economic, et cetera. And it's an attempt to try and develop a framework with this interdisciplinary perspective that gives us the capacity to identify most important, most pressing questions, from all the way from really academic questions to really applied questions. And it also gives us a framework for trying to work towards more quantitative methods that we can use to identify the levers of control that we can use to move towards a sustainable future system state. So really the approach that our team has been taking is to use this approach of zooming in and zooming out, where you're starting with the really big picture, looking at the entire system and trying to identify the main variables within that system that are influencing our ability to move towards a more sustainable future, drilling down to really understand the most important system variables, and then stepping back out in order to understand how all of those different pieces are connected to each other, so that we can identify how a change in one component of the system ultimately will unfold and cause changes in other parts of the system. I know it might sound a little abstract, so as I get into our case study, maybe that will become a little bit more vivid. So our case study, as Anjali already mentioned through Coty's work and the art visualization component, was we were focusing on the Santa Fe watershed. It is a really great place to delve into the sustainable water resources issues because it's got a little bit of everything that we're facing across the Intermountain West. We have a forested headwater system that is snowmelt driven, that is facing significant wildfire risks and all of the issues that come along with trying to manage our forests in a resilient and sustainable way. We have diverse populations ranging from Coche de Pueblo down at the confluence with the Rio Grande. We have Spanish land grants, and of course we have the city of Santa Fe and rural county residents. We have challenges between the diversity of water sources, whether that be from dwindling headwater supplies or overpumping of groundwater, or now dependence on the Rio Grande, where water is pumped uphill to the city of Santa Fe, which is part of a water diversion from the Colorado River. We have mixed land use, everything from federal to private ownership. So this system in a nutshell has it all. It has it all in terms of what we are trying to improve our understanding of for social ecological systems, and what we can do to try and move these systems towards a more sustainable state. As represented here through this beautiful artwork that Coty pulled together for us as through the program that Anjali was describing, there's the approach that we took. We started out by first having the whole team just brainstorm on what variables they feel are most important for trying to understand the long-term dynamics of this system. So that could be anything from, as captured here in some of these fun graphs that the participants just sketched out to try and think about how variables change over time. So things like how annual precipitation patterns are changing, to the more social components, like how citizen trust is being impacted by the decisions of the policymakers in the basin. From there, we really tried to focus on how those interconnections could help us develop important research questions. So for example, the team that I was involved with were really interested in the interrelationship between trust in the decision-making process and adaptive capacity of that process. From there, we stepped into more of the systems thinking, and we'll have a quiz on this over at the tap room when we reconvene at 4:30. But this is what all the different teams, we were broken up into different subgroups and really tried to take on these research questions and think about how all of these variables are connected to each other. And how if you change one, what's the ripple effect downstream? Finally, from there, we looked at how all of those questions are tied to each other. So now we're starting to zoom back out. So we started big picture, zoomed in, and now we're stepping back out to think about how all of those pieces are connected, and developed the early framework for some system dynamics modeling tools. And then finally, at the end of that, we stepped back to think about where do we want to take this into the future, and I'll provide some opportunities for others to get involved with where this is all headed in just a few slides here. I don't really remember what's coming next, but we'll figure it out.
And you have just a few minutes to wrap up.
And we'll see where this goes then. Okay, so yeah, look, it's talking about next steps, so we must be getting there. So yeah, the workshop component of this was completed in January and February, but there's still some future opportunities where we're taking this next. One is that Yolanda and Alex are going to be coordinating a proposal writing workshop in June. So if you're interested in learning more about this and trying to contribute to this effort, you can reach out to us and let us know, and we can get you plugged into that. Also, this is a plug for Yolanda's class that I think is really going to be phenomenal. I'm sending my students to this, so you should all as well. If you're interested in getting your students trained up on how to do systems modeling in an environmental context, Yolanda is teaching a class where they're going to take this case study, and that's going to be central to the work that they're going to do in it. It's Geography 423, 523 in the fall. So some quick lessons learned. I'll just highlight a couple of things here because I know we're running short. One is taking the time to hear each other and to get on the same page in terms of the language that we're using and the way that we think about systems. Second, it was, I think, a lot of lessons learned and pretty clever use, I would say, actually, from Yolanda and Alex's perspective, or their experiences of technology and understanding where people are and trying to get them. Don't make assumptions where people are. And finally, that we got a lot out of taking time to do things. So many times when we have our brainstorming meetings and we're trying to figure out priorities and identify research questions, we kind of leave it at that. But this was a case where we actually took the time over 5 weeks to sit there and do some of the work and go from the really conceptual and drill down into that nitty gritty. And then again, step back and think about what we've accomplished and where we want to go next. So I think that is it. So if you have compliments, you can send them my way. Otherwise, any issues, concerns, here's Yolanda's contact information. And she's got the best email on campus, just her initials, ycl@unm.edu. It beats mine, which is stone@unm.edu. And I'd be happy to try and field some questions.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Mark. One of the really fun things about working this program with Alex and Yolanda in particular as they developed it is they're really looking at a system for generating these collaborative projects. And with that proposal workshop, one of the things that we'll be looking at is the opportunity to apply to an NSF grant where we talk about using this type of system for idea generation. So it's not just specific to the science, but the process that was used here. I'm gonna see if we have any questions for Mark or for any of our speakers. And if not, I'm going to encourage everyone who is on campus to come over and join us at Draft and Table for some cookies and some refreshments of your own purchase, unfortunately. And we will have a couple additional speakers over there presenting some of their work. Thank you very much to our speakers and to our attendees for your time. Really great to see the breadth of the work being done under the Grand Challenge program, and to be able to see where some of these smaller pilot investments are leading, and to the very impactful things that are going to happen in the future based on these initial investments. So thank you.
Thank you, Anita.
Thanks, everyone. See you, everyone.
Thank you.